I'm actually really excited about this. I missed you. I missed this whole situation. And
As did I. I missed
yeah,
everybody. I haven't seen Ed in a long. I haven't seen either of you since Portugal.
stupid. Yeah,
Oh, I
which
know.
we should talk about for a minute because we haven't even debriefed.
Yeah,
Debrief on Portugal is like what's it all about? I mean, I feel like Portugal. The thing that shocked me about Portugal was how. Is there a nicer term than uptight? I don't know, like uptight.
yeah.
I was not expecting that. Every time, all of the events we tried to have, there was just like noise complaints everywhere. It was amazing. And it's funny
Really?
because as people were having parties and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, they keep getting shut down." Like the neighbors complain, and I was like, skill issue. Like you're being weird. You did something wrong, and then like definitely I like went out to eat with my family, and like there was two kids playing, and it was just like literally people that didn't even know us were like shh, shh, like shushing the kids. I was like, bro.
I didn't experience any of that, and I thought it was actually like kind of low key, but that is weird.
Well, I think it's low key because they're so anti joie de vie. I don't know. It struck me as like I like Portugal. I like Portugal fine, but it was definitely that was surprising to me because so much about it is like Latin America, or just because it's like I lived in Brazil for a long time. It's kind of similar to Brazil, except for in Brazil, people are just like like playing the drums in the street and like crying, like lovers getting in fights.
Passionate, yeah.
Yeah, it's very like hot blooded, as they say. But what do you think about Portugal?
I really loved it. When I was there, I like to take a lot of time by myself to just kind of like walk around. And I was trying to like avoid using whatever the transit app or whatever was. Like I actually really liked the walk from the venue to the hotel that we were in, just because you can get like a really cool sense of like the wear and tear of the street.
Yeah,
which sounds like a stupid. So just to get to the point, it's like I found myself taking a lot of pictures of like municipal, grates and things on the ground and little plaques. And so I have like this really sick collection of like just photos of just the random stuff on the street that was just really cool.
True to the arena cell.
No, for real. Yeah, no, it was just like that strange collecting mindset. But it's funny though, because you get different flavors of this in like cities of various types, and like I'm from kind of like Arizona, where like a lot of the streets and sidewalks are like no one uses them; they use cars. So the concrete out there is like it's exquisite. And so what's really cool about like Louisiana, like New Orleans, for example, beautiful city, and you can just like feel how ancient it is when you're just walking around. And obviously Portugal is European, and that place is pretty old, so it was cool to see that too.
It's funny because like that's the thing about it is it's like so old. It's got that kind of decaying.
Mm-hmm. It's like a fallen empire.
It has like that very real vibe. Real. Like these people used to run the fucking world, and now it's like just falling apart. But it's also like you imagine that anything that is like continuously inhabited for that long is going to always be in some sort of state of like falling apart, right? There's really no way you can keep like you were saying. It's like suburban Tucson is like that's how you keep it spick and span. Is like it's like new. No one actually uses the street, uses the sidewalks and stuff. It's like
yeah.
So it had that very, very interesting vibe to it.
Yeah, no, so I was really into it. I mean, I thought it was just a beautiful place. Definitely want to go again and just maybe visit other parts of the country, maybe close to the ocean.
Did you go to this thing called I want to say it's Padrão de Descobrimento. It's like this huge sculpture right on the river that like looks like a stylized ship. Did you see that?
I think I had caught a glimpse of that, but I didn't actually get close to it.
Yeah, I didn't. It's kind of
I get to walk there.
I mean, it just like brings home to you that this place, like, that's what's I think so cool about Portugal is that the Portuguese, like, they basically were like, okay, no one sailed a ship like this before. We're gonna go all in on like just like building these huge ships and launching them off basically the end of the earth, right? And which is just like an insane. I mean, you think about the parallel to that, where someone's just like, okay, I'm the king of the United States. Well, I mean, not even the king of the United States, king of like. I don't even know, like New Hampshire, like the size of it, right? I'm going to basically put all of our resources, cut down all of our trees to make ships, and I'm going to like make all the universities about like astrophysics or I mean, whatever the equivalent would be now, and then just like launch people into space and hope something works.
Hope something sticks, you know.
It's pretty
that's yeah, it's like we're kind of missing, you know, that wanton destruction of the planet in service of, like, you know, something sick.
Exactly. Yeah, like we're wantonly destroying the planet, but for like basically, I don't know, to build more vape pens. I don't know, like just
to me, it's like data centers are proliferating.
Yeah, get enough cobalt, then we can finally make something fucking cool.
Infinite. No, there'd be more vape pens. It'd be cheaper vape pens. I think about that a lot when I see like one of those like disposable vapes like crushed on the ground, and you're like, think about the rare earth metals that like were delved out of the earth to make this like basically piece of trash. Something evocative there. Coco, what do you think about Lisbon? About assembly and Lisbon?
I mean, I think like I had a great time. For me personally, very big moment. I had 35 Twitter followers before I emceed, and I had 34 after. So for me, it was like a professional growth moment. But I thought I had a good time. It was really, I was really impressed with like the production crew. I think like everyone did a good job. I loved the venue. It was weird. And I loved the city. I hadn't been to Europe in a while. And so it was actually felt good. And I would love to go back too. I think like that's a great place to like rent a car and like dick around.
Oh,
it was
for sure.
really,
and it's so small.
It's small, and it really is beautiful. I mean, I was lucky enough to only get out of the city sort of like for 19 hours or something, but it was beautiful. Yeah, I was happy about the whole situation.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Yeah, so I would say 2 thumbs up.
All right, it's good. It's good. I would say. I mean, my early comments don't get the impression that I didn't have a good time. I had an amazing time. I think also like I had just been in Portugal, so and I think I had this thing also where it's like I realized how much of an American I was, because I'm like, there's a certain amount of this old shit that I'm just like, I don't like this old shit. I feel like I'm sure that if you're Portuguese, you like look at the traditions and the lineage, and you feel this sense of like pride. It's like, and I'm like, I just don't.
We talked about this a little bit. I am American. I like driving on a dirt road, like in a truck. Like it's just what I am. But also like we're just seeing a little slice of shit. Just like a little slice of something for a short period of time in a city.
For me, when I go abroad, I come back and I'm like, oh, America is actually very special. Like it's very different. It's like, I mean, if you're an American, and probably a lot of people that like live functionally in like American culture, it's like you end up thinking that this is like the default way of being or something. It's probably true for everybody. And you go abroad and you're like, oh no, actually, like America is very unique. Like just like how just insanely big everything is. For example, there's like people who are like, mixed use walkable, whatever planners are like, shit on American cities and stuff. But you go abroad and you're like, I kind of actually do like just like driving a big ass truck on a big ass road and just blasting country music. It's like, there is something unique to that. You don't, you only find here in the US of A.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ed, I feel like fabled-faster. Sorry, fabled-faster.
We're all gonna get assassinated after this.
We are.
Twitter live.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah.
I think I referred to you as a design micro celebrity. I think that's a fair assessment. And I was thinking like, I'd really like to hear just kind of your Urbit origin story. It's like, how did you get into this whole thing? Like, what attracted you about the project initially?
Yeah.
What you were doing, just the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a nutshell, like not to even like draw it out for too long, but I think the best summary is that I was basically discovered Urbit while in the context of working at a really large old American company called IBM.
I've heard of that.
And it's it's kind of like being in a country. I think when I had been working there, at least it was like 300,000 people.
Holy shit.
Which sounds stupid. Like that actually doesn't sound correct. But I think that's just the way that the numbers went down, is that with all the contractors and the staff and it being kind of huge, it's just stupid.
That's
huge.
So for reference, the city of Wichita Falls
doesn't make
Texas
any sense.
Is 140,000 people. So it's double the size of Wichita Falls, Texas.
Yeah. And so I just remember hearing that number and just thought that was kind of stupid. And basically, I guess the context when stumbling on Urbit was that I was working on this project that basically amounted to installing sensors in places like stadiums and in Macy's. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that these sensors, using kind of like the Wi-Fi, like, hey, I'd like to, jump on the Wi-Fi on my device at Macy's. What it would do is it would track you around space and where you were in the store, and it would see where you lingered. And by virtue of collecting all that information, it would be another way of sending you ads to your phone. Wow. That's kind of the short of it. So, working on a project like that, you really quickly begin to realize that what you're doing is evil, which I certainly did. But as a result of that, learned about a variety of different sort of local networking technologies, just like how does a phone connect to a local access point? How do you do things like roughly, phone-to-phone networking, like things like AirDrop on an iPhone? And basically discovered Urbit as a result of the research that we were doing there, and was like, oh yeah, well, what are the P2P technologies out there that are viable? At the time, there were a lot of things like DAT and just like the DAT protocol and just surrounding technologies. And Urbit was kind of like one of these strange, weirdo aesthetic projects that I think amounted to relatively solid P2P technology that actually ended up being way more interesting than everything else because of just the sort of breadth of how ambitious it was. So I think that's like the nutshell, is working in a big evil company and then discovering that there was in fact a potentially way out. So that's basically how I stumbled on Urbit. And at that time, that was in 2015 or so, 17 maybe, and didn't really interact with the project until 2019 when I met you all at Twan and we all started working together. So that's how that happened.
So were you working though as a designer? Were you doing graphic stuff? Because I feel like you're, if I can gas you up a little bit, I feel like you're like a designer in the good sense of the term, in that I feel like you have a very, very strong graphic sensibility, but you also think about design sort of in a more traditional way, if that makes sense. Sure. Were you? Well, first of all, yeah. One, am I making shit up? Do you feel that? How do you think about design? And then second, were you working in that capacity already at IBM?
Well, it kind of got somewhat baited by IBM in that when I was kind of coming on as a designer, this was at the start of their so-called IBM Design Initiative, which was that I think they had recognized prior to our cohort of 60 people joining that IBM basically had 100 developers to a designer in the company. And so they kind of wanted to even out the odds for a bit. And so when they took me on, I had been more or less pitched that I would be doing industrial design, which is the design of physical products or mass manufactured goods. And I was under the impression I'd be working with Lenovo stuff, building enclosures for computers and that sort of thing. Yeah. And they ended up sort of nah, you're not going to do that. We're going to dump you in the UX designer pile, and you're just going to learn how to do this stuff. And so it was a bit of a bait where I was I thought I'd be doing the things that I loved at the time, which was designing physical goods, because that shit is really, really cool and very Lindy, and I guess you could call it traditional. I learned how to I had to sit in a fucking classroom and learn how to draw straight lines for 6 months. It was kind of what I'm talking about, proper drafting table stuff. Yeah. And so this is to say that I kind of had to pretty quickly adapt my way of thinking from how does a physical good fit in your hand, or kind of wrap itself around your body in classic ergonomics terms, and sort of map that way of thinking to how do you use a computer, which it turns out there's a lot of thinking there. Learned how to pick that up relatively quickly, but I guess this is a long way of saying that even now in the work that I'm doing now, I tend to kind of think of design as being not necessarily even like graphic stuff or visual stuff. It's like of the body, right? It's like how do you kind of like assemble software that kind of roughly conforms to the fact that everyone has a body and is like a human being and has hands and, you know, legs or doesn't, and has eyes and ears or doesn't, and sort of respect people like that way. And so like I sometimes like joke that like I could do my job better if like my eyes were gouged out. A part of me actually kind of like still believes that to be kind of true, where like I think that a lot of what's evil about a lot of software these days is that people kind of treat it as graphics or like as like a poster to be stared at, when it's like, you, in my opinion, you really should be thinking about software as like almost like appendages or like parts of your body. And so I don't know, that's kind of like where I come at the whole thing from.
Yeah, so your background really is in like physical goods, let's say.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
the UX stuff is second to that.
In a sense, it's like, I think that, you know, because of IDEO and all these agencies, I think a lot of UX was kind of twisted in service of like, oh yeah, how do you smooth out the experience? You know, like slop, or like how do you make it really easy to go through flows on a computer? And, you know, that's in service of like, you know, shoving more ads into your face, or like ordering pizzas on apps easier. And like, I don't know, I've always felt that like highly idealized software would kind of be more like designing appendages or like prosthetics for the body, or for the mind, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I don't know.
So that's an interesting point. I think that basically there seems to be a trade-off between like something like Vim, or, you know, any or Emacs. Sorry for everybody who's, I don't want to start a holy war in the comments here, but like, you know, any kind of like, and Coco, do you know what those things are? Sorry, I don't want to be pedantic, but just to gauge, do you know what those are? Vim and Emacs?
I was letting it sink in, and no.
you were okay. So basically, and Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, these are editors. Now people use, you know, other things like VS Code. There's a lot of things like this that are editors for basically just for programming, I would say. People use them for word processing, but mostly for programming. And they're you know, they're specialist tools. Like, I mean, if you go open up Vim and try to start like typing shit, you're probably gonna somehow like, you know, exit, you know, write two things, exit, and then your computer will explode. Like, it's not an obvious, you know, thing to use. But it's a very powerful thing to use. So it seems like there's a trade-off, right, between something being immediately easy to use and there being power, let's say, be power user stuff. And so so do you think though that's like a irreducible trade-off? Do you know what I mean? Like, is that like is that can you get around that? Or is that just like you got to pick one or the other?
I don't know. It's like, no, this is kind of one of those, even kind of like for me, just internally contentious topic, because it's like, I do find value in making, or ideally kind of developing software that's easy to use, quote unquote. But for me, that kind of equates to like easy in the sense of like you as a human being knowing how to like, you know, clench a hand into a fist or like jump on a table or something. Like, the thing that I really find unfortunate about a lot of software, Twitter is actually a great example, is that when you're using this thing, you know, it is amazing when you let yourself sort of just use it at a shallow level. But the more you want to kind of be like, oh yeah, well, how do I use Twitter to do really cool stuff with the people I follow? You kind of realize that you're like the dude from A Clockwork Orange, and like you're strapped to a chair, and like you can only like literally navigate in 2 dimensions, up or down on the timeline. Like, you are really heavily constrained in terms of what you can do. You can only like, you can retweet, and I guess you can share to external services through predetermined APIs. Like, on one hand, okay, that's easy to use, but I think for me, like, the thing that Vim and Emacs kind of reach to is the sense that you can actually break out of that dimensionality of just text, and you can like do weird, cool shit with it. And I guess like for me, it's like the promise of something like Urbit, given everyone who uses an Urbit is basically running a personal computer, is that like there should be a world where it's like yeah, I can use basic apps as a company developed it, but like I can kind of choose in Ace Hotel to jump on a table and start screaming shit to people if I really wanted to. I should be able to kind of like upend the model of interface that's presented to me in Urbit, write my own way of interpreting and just do something weird with it. So it's like, it's kind of another way of saying that, like, I think in an ideal world, like people on Urbit would be able to like take something like Twitter and like do really crazy shit with it, or even, you know, even potentially malicious stuff. You know, we have to develop a good system that, you know, helps people not, you know, get scammed or whatever. But I think that's, you kind of want to get to that point to begin with, you know.
Well, that's an interesting point, right? Because like, let's even say that there is an irreducible trade-off between like ease and power. You know what I mean? Like, let's just say that there is. Then maybe the best option then is to allow the user to decide whether they want to be easy or powerful, right? As opposed to it being decided for them, which is kind of what happens. Now, it's funny, I was talking to someone about Twitter, and it's interesting how much time, I mean, if you're going to use it for like any kind of marketing or messaging or anything like that, you think about like, okay, what does the algorithm want, right? What does the algorithm want? And then you think about like why the algorithm wants those things. And it's kind of interesting to think about, like, because it's not purely, because we were talking specifically, I think, about like these like long effort posts on Twitter, you know, these huge things. And I'm sort of like, to me, we're thinking about like whether or not those are privileged by the algorithm. And then it's interesting to think though, okay, well, we know that it's an initiative within Twitter that they want more of those. So it probably makes sense that they actually like juice those posts more than normal, right? But it's interesting. You have this kind of like intermediary level between, but you have so like when you're thinking about the software system, you're thinking about the incentives of the user, and then you also have to kind of interpose the incentives of the organization, which is a very weird, you know, very hard to reason about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I mean, I think it's like that's an interesting problem.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I think to the point of it being a trade-off at the end, whether you kind of optimize for the organization building the thing or the person using the thing at the end of the day, something that I've been thinking about is that, you know, it would be really cool if somehow we did kind of break out the way of using Urbit software such that in the example of like, you know, Tron's kind of chat app or chat system or whatever, that as a user, you could really almost like set the boundaries on how you'd even like to engage with that. In the sense that even though you aren't necessarily a programmer or working at, you know, Urbit Foundation or Tron, maybe there's a world where you could like set a constraint on a channel of communication, and instead of like having that be text-based communications, maybe I'm like, oh yeah, well, I only want the inputs for this channel to be voice-based. Or maybe I only want people in this chat to like communicate through drawing with their finger on like a device. It's like, and having that be the only way that you communicate inside the channel is really interesting. And something that you can't really do with other systems from kind of like an easy development perspective. Like I can't take like, you know, Apple Messages and then constrain the thing to say that like, yeah, everyone in here is only allowed to draw. Like you can't just do that. And I think ideally more software in Urbit would maybe conform to a point of view where it's like, well, maybe you can do that. Maybe you should do that. Maybe we should open that up and just make other people be able to determine their input method.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because theoretically, you can do that right now, right? But you have to be a programmer to be able to do that, right?
Yeah,
which means that you have to open up a text file and write a whole bunch of gobbledygook into it, right? And you can't write the wrong gobbledygook. It has to be the right gobbledygook. And then you have to save it. It's like, which is just an amazingly terrible UX if you think about like how
totally.
At the kind of like meta level that you have to write a whole bunch of text files and remember weird words and shit. Like it's a very weird, I mean, it's just like, that is a huge UX fail. And I keep coming back to this thing, and I mean, you've heard me say it. It's like qua programming is basically a failure of UX, right? It's like, you're admitting that your computer is too fucking like shoddily designed for a normal person to use. So you basically have like this concierge service in the form of a programmer to kind of like, help you through it. So now you have another person in there.
No, yeah, more or less. I was joking with someone that for all of the hype that kind of LLMs get, it's a shame that people are kind of using them to just do dumb shit with. My example, like locally of like dumb shit is that like I like almost 80% of my use of something like ChatGPT is to write regexes, right? It's like whoever invented regex is a fucking idiot. They're probably doing the best that they could, but at the end of the day, it's like, what is this insane number of characters that I need to input into a system just to have it recognize patterns? I think the dream is that like maybe there is a world where I never have to ever write regex ever again. I can just like utter an ideal pattern I'd like to see some software like reflect back at me, and then it just happens, right? I mean, that's the thing that is kind of magical, thinking about how these really overhyped systems could be applied to something like Urbit, is that because Urbit is a lot smaller than your typical Unix system or other similar OS level software, like whatever is constructed, whatever constructs Windows, for example. The event log itself is kind of like a magical material, this strange kind of like meta material where it's like, well, if we could make a computer able to understand a rough sense of input into the event log, I can do maybe magical things, like say, hey, I want to render a view where it's just every time poldec has ever fire emoji'd anything, and then maybe that's just a view that I could whisk up. Like that, I think that is kind of like maybe the dream state of some of these systems, is to kind of like not have an LLM approximate like a GF or something kind of like sad like that. Is to kind of do things that like, it's like to do things that like, you shouldn't have to do. You shouldn't have to write regex or like know how to program Urbit to kind of like delve into your event log and do cool stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So it's sort of, I mean, I was talking to, I believe, Noah about this earlier. It's kind of interesting because I think the inner meaning of the AI thing, this, I don't know which AI summer or winter this is. I mean, I guess it's, symbolically summer, but, actually winter. But you know what I mean? It's like, this is like the third or fourth. It's like the meaning behind it is actually that people want a different way to interact with their computer. It's like, that's really what it comes down to, right? And I think that, like, I have a lot of doubts that a natural language system is the best way to do that. I mean, there's lots of, people are totally fine. We don't need to Ask Jeeves 2.0. Like, I think people are totally fine using a keyworded system, et cetera, and so forth. But like, it does, I think, signal a demand that people are like, I don't want to, like, when I want to do something with the computer, I don't want to go like ask a developer and then get like a shitty, like estimate, and then maybe 6 months later I get something. It's like, that's not what people want. And so right now, that's kind of what these LLMs are promising, but it's not the only way. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, I think people are ready for a new way to interact with the computer. And I think something like Urbit is superior to an LLM in a lot of ways, because you're starting with a much simpler thing to learn about. Right? Like the model is conceptually simple, and that's really the whole pitch here, is that you have a conceptually simple computer. And so I think that it's sort of like the time is ripe for these alternative models.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that a lot of this stuff is kind of like hyped to kind of a crippling degree, and then what you do see resulting from it are people basically hyping the idea of like a Verizon call center robot as like the primary input method to these new systems. That's just really depressing to me. Like, I don't know, there's something I think that does need to be shaken up about the way that people are thinking about this stuff. It's like a failure of imagination to look at, these kind of embeddings that kind of represent like really heavily compressed models of the internet, or kind of a quote unquote human knowledge, and then basically like say that, oh yeah, the only way you can interact with this thing is by typing to it, and then waiting 3 minutes for it to type a response back to you. It's just pathetic, honestly.
It really is. There is something very end of days about the whole thing, in my opinion, because really it kind of seems like we're like going, okay, well, everything worth knowing or doing is on the internet already, so let's scrape the whole internet and then search it, and then that's the best we can do, which kind of like implies it's like we're done or something, So a search engine is the best we can do. And I'm like, that's not really like, it's not true, and it's also kind of like sad at the end of the day. And so I think of a lot about that, like how do you make computers, like this is the thing I wrote to you, and it's like I think that it's actually just like a fact that computers have stopped increasing efficiency or productivity. It's like there's really been no gain in it since like maybe the 80s or something. Yeah. And so the question is like, why is that? And it's not from lack of computers, because we're just getting more and more computers. It's almost a design problem ultimately.
Yeah, it's like the way this stuff is being kind of used and presented to people. It's
yeah,
just,
which is design, right? Yeah. I mean, that's like, I feel like that's kind of like the core of the whole thing, which is means it's, our future's in your hands, dude.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done for sure. I don't know. I always got the sense that you just need more people trying weird shit. And if you were to like really boil down, Urbit to even kind of like a conceptual approach, it's like something that I kind of repeat to people a lot is that a lot of the ways that computers have developed up until now, from a Raspberry Pi to Arduino to even your iPhone, it's kind of like people decided at one point that the kind of like ALGOL programming language, C-shaped lineage, things that are easy to program on like a DEC computer from the fucking 50s is like if you imagine computation as like an expressive mode, we only decided to take like one branch of the tree, so to speak. To me, that's equivalent to saying that like, ceramics, right? Ceramics is the art of taking a raw material from the planet, from the earth, and casting it into a variety of forms, kind of manipulating it in certain ways. Through ceramics, you can build a brick, which can construct a building. You can create a tile that goes on the space shuttle that can fucking withstand, however millions of degrees of heat applied to it. You can make like a little delicate, beautiful little vase to hold a flower in coinage. Like you can do an insane amount of things with this art form, this mode of working that is ceramics. And for whatever fucking reason, we've taken this thing called computation, which is just as rich. And we've decided like, oh yeah, you can only shape a computation in one way. And I feel like, everything that is even considered cutting edge these days, like those goggles that Apple released is all falling on one branch of the tree. And so like, if anything, even if Urbit isn't like performant or like you can do cool shit with it, you can do VR on it, even though you can't achieve supposedly cutting edge things on it, I do see it at the very least as like a way of thinking about how to take this medium and do something different with it. So that's always kind of like my one maybe fanatical take on like why Urbit is even good to begin with. It's because at least a new branch of the tree is being explored, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. I mean, I think that's like I think that I'm always skeptical when the attitude of something is like, okay, we've figured out the best branch of this, or whatever, the way of the maze or the branch of the tree. We figured out that this one's the best one, so let's just keep going down the road, and that's going to be the best result, right? And I think that's just like, ultimately, that's just kind of, I hate to denigrate, it's just kind of dumb, it's just like almost like what definitionally separates kind of like original work is the reevaluation of those things.
I think all of these things, to me, they have this like depressing sensation of sameness. It's a new thing and it's a new, whatever, but it's actually all the same shit that we're being fed. To me, it just all feels the same. It's hard for me. I don't get there's no like, nothing happens to me. I'm totally unmoved by these things. Do you know what I mean?
And it's not because we're old. No, I know what you're saying. It's not because our endocrine systems are just falling apart. No, I agree though. I feel the same way. It's hard. And I think it's interesting because even on like, just to bring it back to the kind of like boring visual design level, it's almost like, I don't know. I've almost, my critique of Urbit design in the past has actually been like, it's not like brash enough. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like one of these things where I open up, I'm like, yo, I'm building a new computer. It's XYZ. It's all this shit. You open it up and you're like, oh, this looks like, some other shit,
Yeah.
It's almost like I want someone to open it up open up whatever Urbit, open their Urbit and it's like the Matrix or some shit. They wanted to be like, holy crap, this is not what I was expecting to see. Or like something, and I feel like there's it like, and you see that in a lot of products where it just sort of like, because I think, I think this ultimately ends up being a design, like a corporate design thing, because it's kind of like you think it's safer to kind of like ease people into new things, and so you kind of make things that are shaped like other things, but that's not really actually how you excite anyone.
That's true.
And so
that's true.
I do, and I mean, this is not just about Urbit. This is about everything, right? It's like I do think it's one of those things where, at a certain level, you have to be willing to shock people. You have to be willing to like throw down the gauntlet a little bit. And like, I don't know, I'm trying to think about the last thing I saw, any designed object where I was like, this is some different shit. It's like, I struggle to even think about it. I mean, Ed, maybe you know of some that have kind of excited you.
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't know. That's actually something that I would even like to kind of sit on and just think about for a bit, because nothing does immediately come to mind. I mean, even what you're describing with respect to the way that Urbit interfaces have kind of classically come about, I mean, I can really only speak to what we've done as a conjoined kind of Urbit and Tron organization.
By the way, I was part of all these things, so I'm presenting myself as well.
No. I totally get you. It's like, I think the one element of cope here that I would fully admit to is this idea that, in some respect, like, good design is kind of an acknowledgement of the raw material that you're working with. At least that's kind of like what I believe. It's like, for me, you like, this kind of gets a little bit down into kind of like traditional industrial design, like material science sort of perspectives, which could be argued against. It's this idea that, like, you can't really build something that is truly good with a capital G if you use the wrong material. It's like, you don't want to construct like a classic house key out of glass. You want to do that out of like brass, like nickel. And when you kind of like assess the effectiveness of a good house key on its material qualities, nickel and brass is like a beautiful material for a key. Like, that shit will last forever unless you really, really torque the hell out of it. It's a great material. And it would be stupid if people were to try to like construct house keys out of glass, for example, or paper. And in a similar sense, like, I do think that one element of cope that I would fully admit to with respect to Urbit is this idea that the system can't yet host really rich, really crazy media experiences. And as someone who had been like working on it, since 2019, it's like, well, fuck, do I take on the approximation of like a really slick, really hyper fast, really well animated service that, really only the Apples or Googles of the world can achieve with their software? Or do we try to like take it back a notch and be like, well, this thing is only capable of such and such interaction, such and such speed. So it's my hope that, as we move on in this project and things like Aries starts to emerge, and like we can kind of start to approximate how using a contemporary computer should feel like, that maybe we can kind of like reassess the coping mechanism of just like keeping things simple for simplicity's sake, for kind of like constraints sake. I certainly think that we could do a better job in kind of getting the current software, feeling a lot, more weird or more alien even.
One thing that I've always thought is like, one way it could have gone, and I still think this is good, is like, the more transparent you make the UI, transparent meaning is like, I mean, just the most transparent, just being like the old command line system that existed when we all got on, right? It's like, then you're just exposing exactly what the system can do at any time. And hewing as close to that as possible just seems like another option. I mean, totally, if we could have done something like where we're like, hey, I mean, that's what I think is interesting. I was talking to Joe back in Lisbon, and he was like, talking about how great the Urbit experience was like back when it could do nothing, and he was like, of course it had a lot of technical things that we still have gotten a lot better on, but it's interesting because it definitely had that experience where you open it up and you're like, what the fuck is this, right? Which I think is very interesting. Like, designing for initial confusion is almost like its own, maybe its own kind of like design outcome. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of like the big dick energy of the design world. It's like, this is it. This is it. And how do you do it in a way that's like, you shave off, you just kind of identify the most sharp edges and you shave those off, right? But like, you don't try to make the whole thing like super whiz bang, because like you're saying, it's like you're just gonna fall on your face, and that's gonna be embarrassing and sad for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, even with basic text manipulation, you can get some really interesting results if you kind of like couch it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, just like that you see these like ChatGPT is an example, right? It's like going back to just text interface, which is like it's very funny, right? I mean, it's like this is time is a flat circle. Like I said, I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but there you go. So I was going to ask you what you thought, and like this is my last question, then we can see if anyone else has questions. Like what you thought in terms of making like what ideas from physical design do you think? How do you think about bringing those ideas from physical design into computard design?
Oh, geez, yeah, that's a big question. Well, I suppose like keeping mind of the fact that people aren't just like brains attached to keyboards is a good place to start.
Okay.
Just in terms of like constraining, what someone can do with the system. I would suppose that's something that I would love to apply someday to the idea of Urbit, is this ability to kind of like fully extend yourself as kind of like an agent in a digital world into a variety of directions other than like, scrolling up and down or paging between things, which does admittedly sound a little bit abstract, but there's a part of me that does think that it would be fun to kind of bring a little bit more materiality to Urbit in the form of working with things like time, for example, or in terms of like taking into account the surrounding environment. Like you could do really interesting things alone with just like day and night cycles, apart from like light and dark modes in the interface. There's kind of like a lot of almost like parametric thinking that one can bring to the fold. I think we have to acknowledge that just because Urbit is a digital system, there's really only so much you can bring to it that does kind of imbue physicality to it. In the sense, like I can't magically turn landscape into like a brick of marble. Like that would be cool, but realistically, that just can't be done right now.
That's like 5 years out.
Yeah. We got some time. we can diamond age this shit someday, I imagine. But I think that like at the very least, we could do much more interesting things with like what is computable, which is you have time, you have some semblance of like what does what are the kind of various like sense inputs you can make use of in the system. I don't know, like one person on Urbit was like trying to build like a mouth interface for the longest time, like being able to control like an Urbit with like your tongue or something, like those devices for people who are paraplegic. It's like it's like hell yeah, dude. It's like we need more experimentation like that. That would be really sick to see in the system. Or even like I guess like one thing that I do kind of appreciate with some of the recent hot news of AI world is this idea of like bringing back the Tamagotchi as kind of like an input method, where it's like, well, even though iPhones and Android devices are kind of like magical black box devices, they are quite locked down and can really only achieve, a limited amount of what is actually possible with the device. And it is cool to see people start to think about, well, how do I break out of this system? How do I use these little Tamagotchis I, drape on my body to take in the world and do interesting stuff with it? Would love to see that stuff applied to Urbit. That would definitely bring it more into the physical realm in a meaningful way.
Interesting. That's really good. I was thinking also like, there are, I think about Tetris a lot, like, there we go. That's just me. Because it like, I like the physicality of it. Even though it's not like physical, just the puzzle-like nature of it fits like, most programming in the broad sense, like, fitting things together, right? And like protein folding, there's all this stuff that has this kind of nice key and lock nature to it that can be represented, even though it's not in the physical world, because it's almost like somehow there's something more like lizard brain primal about that than like words, right? I mean, if you think about like if data types were, proteins, for example, and you had to just kind of like find, Dr. Mario as programming interface is yet to be tried.
No, for real. I mean, I was kind of classically just shitposting on Twitter, and a recent shitpost that I was making was that like a musical instrument is kind of, you can think of it as like a crystal. It's like a kind of like a fixed lattice of potential. It's almost like a function in a way, where it's like, well, you can't really do piano things on a violin, but you can certainly, do flute-like things maybe with like a clarinet. Like there's kind of like a closer alignment of potential there. And something that I think is a really dreamy idea is this idea of being able to turn an Urbit, some representation of an Urbit, into an instrument of some sort. Like I think that if for people who are kind of aware of how Urbit is even structured, it's like all nouns and atoms, right? It's like two things. It's really one thing, but it's all just, these very, very simple, types of data. I was always from the very beginning enamored with the idea of auras, or even casting things, which I know is like, it's not that big of a deal, but there's something so fundamentally sick about the idea of being able to cast some, blob of data in Urbit into another form, just like that, like with the snap of a finger. And so it's like people have talked about turning, the Urbit namespace or representations of people into, smells. Shout out to Allmark and company. There are people who've thought about turning this symbolic system into sound. It's like, what would it sound like if your Urbit was kind of like a bird and just always chirping out the sounds of computation? I think that to your point, it's like the fact that this is such a simple system at its core starts to belie this idea that, it could be cast into really, really rich systems with very little effort. And I truly feel like we haven't really taken that to its logical conclusion yet.
That's a really interesting point, because like, I feel like it seems undeniable that they're probably the biggest advances in technology broadly writ are creative, are the stuff like you could do things in Photoshop that are impossible in the analog world. It's like not there is this you just gain more expressivity. And I think, but it's interesting because like up until now, that has been kind of like it's like a thing. Function that the computer does, right? Like you're not going to be in the, and so it's interesting to think like, okay, well, can you turn it back on itself, right? I mean, like, can you, instead of just Blender, you ship the Blender app and you do things in it, like, can you turn it back onto Blender? Can you use Blender to make a new version of Blender? Right? And that would be the dream. The meta Urbit, actual Urbit maximalism is that any program on your computer you could split open, take apart, use for parts, right? And that would be that. I mean, I think pretty much once that happens, it's like we could all go home.
And the dream is also that like a regular person could someday do that too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. All of that, and then it's in a Tamagotchi. This is the thing.
It's like, you can take like any child, give them like a set of Legos or like wooden blocks, and they can construct something of it. And I think the dream is to kind of be able to take something like, what approximates a Lego brick in Soccer World. Maybe it's like the ability to scroll vertically, or like, a message from someone, and to kind of turn that into a variety of forms. It's like you kind of find often in the world of music that like people frequently use the piano as a starting point to do really complex things, even though it's such a simple device. And like in the sense, a piano could even be construed not even as like a musical instrument. It's really more of like a compiler. It's like you can write entire operas, or you can write vocals on a piano. Yeah. And I think that, the really sad state of software these days is that I can't take Photoshop and like turn that into something weird. I can't like, take a music file and turn that into a 3D shape on a computer. Or if you can do that, it takes a lot of really painful twisting around systems to kind of get to that point. And I think the dream in terms of like auras or Urbit as like a piano-like compiler sort of thing is that like I could take something and ideally just be able to snap my fingers and have that turn on, like take on another form. At least that's kind of like my maybe like naive, kind of like interpretation of like what
if you will it,
is.
If you will it, it is no dream.
Yeah, it's the hope, man.
Theodore Herzl, State of Israel. There you go. If no one has anything, I'm going to let you go, Ed. I will see you very soon. We're going to be in New York. Me and some of the boys are going to be in New York. So if anyone here is listening, we're going to do an Urbit meetup on Thursday night at Magician, starting at 7 p.m. We'll be in the back room, and then we're going to be on Sunday afternoon. We're going to be doing a blimps versus planes debate. It's going to be violent, bloody. There'll be cocktails and a jazz band at Triple Canopy on Canal. So anybody who's in New York, come see us. Come say what's up. We'll be posting flyers and final dates and times and everything very soon. Ed, thanks again.
Oh, yeah.
Great talking to you.
Thanks, Ed. You're the best.
Yeah,
I agree. You are the best. Keeping the dream alive here. All right. Thanks for showing up. We'll talk to you all later.
Bye, y'all.
See you, Coco.
Yeah. Bye-bye.